Film is a relatively new art form. The kinescope was invented in 1892, just roughly 130 years ago. An embryonic amount of time compared to, say, writing, theater, or even photography. So, for a while, people didn't really understand what made a movie, and how a story told through the conduit of film could not just be entertaining, but also important. The process by which a film efficiently and artistically communicated to the audience was not clear. People sort of just got up on stage or a set and did things in front of a stationary camera. Sometimes it would cut to suggest an action, or even pan slightly in a direction if they were really going after it and they were really feeling themselves. Nevertheless, all of that changed when Orson Welles' Citizen Kane stepped onto the scene. Now, Citizen Kane is regularly regarded as the Rolls-Royce of film. It's the film. Everyone has seen it, and everyone is obsessed with it. So much so that Citizen Kane is used as a marker of greatness in other films. I can say things like A24's Moonlight is the Citizen Kane of color-paletted filmmaking, or Panos' Mandy is the Citizen Kane of grindhouse films, or The Dark Knight is the Citizen Kane of superhero movies. Things like that, the list goes on. Additionally, Citizen Kane is consistently referenced in other films, to the point where it's kind of ridiculous. Directors do it so frequently that audience members usually don't even notice it. However, at the same time, many of the techniques and storytelling devices used in Citizen Kane were so revolutionary that it's difficult to make a good movie without pulling from it. So it's kind of like this metaform of reference, where the filmmakers understand that they are indeed referencing Citizen Kane, but whatever they're pulling from works so well, and it's so ingrained in the form and flow, that it isn't even really a reference anymore. It's just filmmaking. That's how pivotal Citizen Kane is. But to properly understand this, we're going to need some background. So there's this crazy kid from Kenosha, Wisconsin named Orson Welles, and he is absolutely nuts. His career starts at 16 in Ireland as an actor and writer. He gets bored, moves to Chicago, and becomes a drama coach at the Todd School, and helps edit 4 volumes of William Shakespeare's complete works. In 1934, at 19 years old, he makes his first Broadway appearance with Katharine Cornell's theater company. He gets bored again and hooks up with mutual badass John Houseman to directly manage a portion of the Work Relief Art Effort's smaller branch of the 1930s federal social program called the New Deal. They aptly named their program together the Federal Theater Project, which later transforms into the Mercury Theater. While Orson is there, he starts putting on all kinds of crazy classic plays for the American people, but with new and bold interpretations. I'm talking things like Voodoo Macbeth, an all-African-American production of the Scottish play. Productions like Julius Caesar, set in fascist Italy. And finally, we're talking about things like a racially integrated cast of Christopher Marlowe's Dr. Faustus, which opened, mind you, in 1937. A 21-year-old Orson has a hand in every facet of this production. He helps design the lights, set, and costumes. He directs and stars in the production as, you guessed it, Dr. Faustus. He gets bored yet a third time and decides to freak out the entire country by directing and acting in the infamous War of the Worlds news radio fiasco. And by attaining the help of a full crew of sound designers, makes half the country believe the world is actually being invaded by Martians. Actually. This guy is something else. He loves controversy. He loves pushing the envelope. So, it makes sense that William Randolph Hearst gets nervous when a 24-year-old Orson Welles decides to make a movie about him under a RKO Radio Pictures contract that provides Welles with full creative control over the picture. Now, Hearst is a bad guy for a bunch of reasons, but none of those reasons really have anything to do with the art of cinematic storytelling, so we're going to keep his information down to a minimum. But basically, he is this absurdly rich man that took advantage of the Great Depression to form a monopoly on America's newspapers to directly control coming-in journalism and therefore control the news the public had access to. Hearst would, rather outwardly, use newspapers to hurt his enemies and push for causes that directly benefited him and his political career as a member of the House of Representatives. He was found staging crimes so that his reporters could then write about them and publish it in his papers. He also pushed for America's involvement in the Spanish War by sending a journalist to Cuba to take pictures. When his journalist wired back to Hearst that there was no observable war and that he wanted to go home, Hearst famously wired back to the reporter, "Please remain. You supply the pictures, and I'll supply the war." He lived in a literal castle on a property half the size of Rhode Island in California with his younger mistress and girlfriend, Marin Davies, who was a writer and actor in Hollywood. The similarities do go on. Naturally, Citizen Kane was met with some resistance from Hearst and therefore the newspapers. If you want to know more, Comedy Central made a drunk history episode about it that's actually pretty funny. But for now, keep in mind that Citizen Kane's narrative is fundamentally based on the life and actions of a powerful man who, at the time, was alive, well, and not into criticism. Citizen Kane played a large role in how media is distributed, digested in the eyes of the public, and therefore changed the mind of the public. It changed how people saw the world. How it does so specifically has to do with the artistic concepts of content and form, which we will now explore. The textbook Looking at Movies: An Introduction to Film defines content as the subject of an artwork, and form as the means by which that subject is expressed and experienced. Form allows us to experience the content in a particular way. That's where the artistry comes in, and content itself is what the work is about. We have already discussed the content of Citizen Kane, but for clarity's sake, let's encapsulate it precisely. A reporter is sent out to decipher the meaning behind Charles Foster Kane's last words, Rosebud. During this fox hunt, the reporter slowly unravels the complex and tragic life of a man who sought truth and power through idealism and integrity, only to be brought down unceremoniously by corruption and insecurity. Now let's take a look at the form. Citizen Kane changed up the game in three primary ways: narrative structure, aesthetic theming, and camera control. Now, narrative structure should come off pretty obviously. Citizen Kane is told in this back and forth manner between the present and the past. The audience slowly gets the picture formed over the duration of the film, but the final understanding of the whole story does not come together until the very end, when the past and present synthesize as one through the audience discovery behind the meaning Rosebud. However, beyond even the time setting of a scene, how the passing of time is handled during the scene is very unique. You have moments like the party scene, when the tempo is really turned up, but it is contrasted by the characters' minds being in a different time, which tells a cool story between the contrast of character and environment and how those two forces eventually collide with one another during the story. Instead of the characters being placed in an environment and events happening to them, environment and character begin to tell one synchronistic story. Then of course you have Citizen Kane's elapsed montages, like the breakfast scene and the scandal about Kane and his wife coming out. This gives only what I can describe as weight to how time is affecting the characters and the world. By the end of the film, you really do feel as though a lifetime has passed. In terms of aesthetic, Citizen Kane is a stupid, gorgeous film. Go back and watch the movie and randomly pause it at any moment. Then imagine the image you see on the screen on a postcard. I personally have found that 8 out of 10 times the image works. Citizen Kane originally came out in black and white, which means that the filmmakers didn't have the added benefit of color to tell their story. Instead, they found new ways to play with shadow, light, and angle. Check out the scene where Kane steps into the shadow while he's consummating the rules for his newspaper. literally foreshadowing his eventual betrayal of the very ideas he lays down for it. You can analyze the shadows and light in this film for days. Finally, the big one, camera control. Now, it is possible that in the two aforementioned qualities of form, that someone somewhere in film was messing around with the ideas. The camera in this film was definitely the first of its kind. Citizen Kane was the first to implement these long, beautiful shots that move with the characters to give a greater sense of spatial awareness and understanding of physical placement. Additionally, it was the first of its kind to use something called deep focus, in which everything within the frame is in the same amount of focus. You see, the human eye is actually wildly inefficient. It can only observe so much in detail at one given time. The point that your eye is completely focused on is the center, while everything else slowly degrades away. This is a natural biological phenomena, and it's often exploited in photography or even in old film. Subjects were set up to be the focus, while other things in the background drifted away. But Citizen Kane brought greater power to what was in the frame by making sure everything in frame had significant meaning, which expands the power and storytelling capabilities of the medium as a whole. That's about it, I guess. Go watch Citizen Kane if you haven't already, and if you have, watch it again. Only let me tell you that if you watch this movie and you start to feel bored because you can't shake the feeling that you've seen this all before, you're correct. Only it's not that Citizen Kane is unoriginal, it's that Citizen Kane is the original. I'm Jacob Proctor for Intro to Film. Thank you.